Alright, welcome to our video on evolution. This is a little picture of some key things we'll go over. Starting with our first story, we have some tall neck giraffes and short neck giraffes. So there is variation present in this population. We also got some tall trees and short trees. Going from this first scenario to this second scene, you notice a big change in the environment. Fungus came in, killed the small trees, they're gone forever. This presents a problem. These short-necked giraffes, they're going to die. They don't have the traits or characteristics to get food anymore. There's no more small trees. Therefore, they're going to die. The long-necked giraffes, however, having a long neck is a helpful, advantageous trait. This will help them to live long enough to pass on their DNA and thus increasing the frequency of tall-necked giraffes generation after generation. Important to note, having its long neck, since it helped the giraffe survive, it's known as an adaptation. An adaptation is a positive trait that helps organisms survive their environment. That's a key word. But if you notice, there are two major things you need for evolution. You have to have variation, and you have to have a change in the environment. Change in environment will choose certain variants to live and others to die. Let's examine this definition or word, evolution. It's the change in allele frequency. An allele is a variation of a gene. Everybody has the eye color gene, but they're not all the same. You get blue eyes, green eyes, hazel eyes. So you have hazel eye alleles, blue-eyed alleles, and green-eyed alleles. Frequency is how often something happens. Change in allele frequency in a population's gene pool. Population's a group of organisms, one species. Gene pool, those are all the different traits present. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, teeth, 2 nostrils. Over time. Evolution takes many generations. Generations vary for different organisms, depending on how fast they reproduce. This whole first story and our definition we just looked at is called natural selection, where nature chooses which organisms live and which die. So in natural selection, not everything lives. Some organisms will live that have helpful traits or adaptations for their environment, and some organisms do not live because they don't have traits to help them survive. So some live, some die. This is Charles Darwin's idea behind evolution. Lamarck opposed or had a different view. He said if these small trees disappeared, those short-necked giraffes, they need a long neck. So they're going to just grow a long neck in their lifetime. That is insane. That's like saying if you were born with no arms and no legs back when we were nomadic, you need legs to move around and be a nomad. You would just grow legs and grow arms because you need them. That's not what happens. Lamarck also said, if that wasn't enough, that if you get a tattoo and you have a baby, that baby's going to have the same tattoo. You get big muscles, you have a baby, that baby's going to have gigantic muscles when it comes out. That's, I don't have to tell you, not what happens. So you have contrasting views, Lamarck versus Darwin. We have our little population of bulls in this scenario, or buffalo. Is there variation? I think so. You get buffalo with no horns, and you have some buffalo with horns. So there is variation. And we also need a change in the environment. Something that will disrupt this population. Oh, there he is. You got a predator. Strolls on in. The predator will be the change. So a new predator in the environment with these bulls. That predator is going to go after the easy meals. Does not want to mess with the horns. All the bulls with no horns, they die. They're selected to die by the predator. So the predator, or the change in the environment, is a selecting agent or a selective pressure, meaning the change in the environment, in this case the predator, chooses which organisms live and which die. So we have a variation and a selective pressure. Evolution can occur. But something different happened here. We got a gigantic, huge river that divides this population of bulls in two. These two populations, they're physically and reproductively separated, meaning physically they are in different locations and they cannot mix and match. Reproductively, they're not hopping over that river and reproducing with bulls on the opposite side. So they cannot exchange genes. There is no gene flow occurring. Gene flow just refers to, let's say, bulls on the left got to the bulls on the right. That's gene flow from the population on the left to the population on the right. There is no gene flow occurring. Geographic isolation, which also means they're reproductively isolated. And it looks like on the right side and the left side, certain bulls are dying. Different bulls, leading to different populations. That means there must be different selecting agents or different selective pressures. On the left, clearly it's the predator. The adaptation definitely is having horns that help them survive. On the right, the selecting agent is females. In good times, when there's plenty of food, no predators, females choose. And you can see peacocks have all those colors and birds sing songs to impress the females. So having no horns was attractive to the females, and those bulls passed on their genes. These two populations that are separated, they could become different species. And if they do, that is referred to as speciation. Speciation, the development of new species from a past species, could happen fast, called punctuated equilibrium. Usually that happens if there's a massive change in the environment all of a sudden. Or it could happen slow, called gradualism. This is more like what we see when there's slow changes in the environment, organisms slowly change over time. New environment, new scenario. We have some fishies. Is there variation? You betcha. There are some fish with eyes, and there's a fish or two with no eyes. What's the gene pool like for these fish? Well, we have eyes, no eyes, tail, a fin, thick versus thin tails. You have an oblong body. You have little fins, big fins. Any characteristic you could find makes up the gene pool. All the characteristics present. Picture 2, it looks like a massive change happened. Rocks fell. Populations separated geographically and reproductively. They cannot get to each other to swap genes. The environments are also different. In the cave is dark, out of the cave is light. So there are different selecting agents or selective pressures. The darkness will cause or select no eyes, because if you have no eyes in a dark environment, that's an adaptation. That's a positive trait, because all the energy spent on making eyes, all that energy that's not going to be spent on making eyes could be used to heighten your other senses. Outside, having eyes is very beneficial in the light because you could find your prey, you could escape predators, you could find a mate. Very advantageous. And just to note, in the dark side, the eyes, or the eye trait, was removed from the gene pool. There's no more fish with eyes. Looking at moths, always make sure you close your closet because moths will eat your clothes. You have a peppered moth and you have a solid black moth on a light peppered tree. This is good for the peppered moths, bad for the all black moths. Nonetheless, there's variation. But a big change happened. And you see on the right, there's a lot of soot that went on those trees. due to the Industrial Revolution. This caused the dark moths to blend in with their environment and the peppered moths to stand out. Blending in with your environment is called camouflage, and it is a good adaptation to have. So those dark moths will live long enough to reproduce and pass on their dark genes, and the population of moths will become more and more dark. Camouflage in this scenario also can help predators. If you're walking along, if you're a little prey and you're walking and then you realize that you're like 5 feet away from this thing, this leopard, you're easy meal. This picture shows 2 snakes. You have the eastern coral. Red touches yellow, not a good thing. You're probably going to die from the venom. Pretty corny, I know, the little saying I wrote. Birds will avoid these snakes because when their friends went over and ate them, they all died. So, any red and yellow or black, any mixture of those, they stay away. So, these scarlet king snakes, usually all red, birds would easily eat those guys. Bam, done. But you had a variant of the scarlet king. Had a mutation for black and yellow spots, kind of similar to the venomous eastern coral. The birds stayed away. These snakes got to increase in number or live long enough to pass on their coloration. So the snakes, the scarlet kings, eventually became colored just like the venomous ones. So the birds avoided them. This is a demonstration of mimicry. You mimic a poisonous animal, so predators leave you alone. Pests on farms and in fields, usually you spray them with pesticides to kill them. This also kills the beneficial insects, which is not good. But on a different note, you spray the field, you kill all the bugs, but there's a few survivors that have resistance. Resistance deals with DNA. It's a genetic mutation that gives you, that allows you not to die from something. In this case, the pesticide. Immunity has to do with immune system and antibodies. So this is resistance, a genetic mutation that allows you to live long and survive. And as time goes on, there's a whole population of resistant bugs. So you could spray them all you want and they won't die. So killing 99%, not a good thing. You want to kill 100%. Because if not, that 1% that lives will reproduce and pass down the resistance, leaving a large population of resistant bugs. Solution to doing this, you could genetically engineer natural pesticides, put a gene into the plant, causing the plant to make its own toxin, so the little pests will bite the plant and die, leaving the healthy ones or good pests or good bugs unharmed, or use a natural predator. That's the most safe way. Bacterial resistance is a huge problem. Around 30 to 50,000 people a year die in the United States, and that number is increasing. Globally, I'm not sure the number, but it's definitely higher. You have a population of bacteria. A couple of them have a random mutation for resistance. Again, resistance is DNA based. Antibiotics kill all the bacteria but these mutated resistant ones. They pass on their DNA and make an huge population of resistant bacteria. Meaning you go to the doctor with an infection and you got these bacteria, they'll say, good luck, hopefully your immune system will fight them off. There's no medicine that will kill them. And they only did this in 6 years. Decades, not millions of years. Because they reproduce so fast. A very short time between generations, allowing them to evolve in decades rather than millions of years. You get two populations. You have one large one and a small one. Which population is going to survive better? The large, because you have a lot more variation. More variation, meaning there's a better chance that you're going to have at least one variant, at least one type or variety that will survive the environment. Small population, you have less variation and not as many chances to survive the environment because there's not as many variants or types. Now this is something, different ways natural selection could change a population. It could change it in one direction, meaning towards one extreme. If you have a black wolf and a white wolf, it's either one or the other. Increase in black, increase in the white, one way, that's directional. Disruptive is if you have a black, gray, and a white wolf. And the intermediate one, the gray one, dies or is eaten. And the two extremes, the black and the white, they'll increase in number. This is what a graph would look like for a disruptive. Increase in black, a decrease in the gray, but an increase in the white. The two extremes increase. And directional, only one direction increases, or one extreme increases. Stabilizing, you have the black wolf, the gray wolf in the middle, and the white wolf. The two extremes are killed, but the intermediate one, that one is chosen to live. So mid-range traits are favored and increase, and the extremes will decrease in stabilizing. Here's a quick little graph. You could always pause and take a little closer look if you like. So let's see how well you know your stabilizing, disruptive, and directional. So we're going to have large beaks and small beaks, because the large beaks can grab the large seeds and crush them and eat them. There'll be small beaks too, because they're able to grab and eat the small seeds. The intermediates, though, they can't do either. They're in the middle. They will die. Therefore, this is going to be disruptive. The thick beaks and the small beaks will survive, but the mid-range ones won't. 2, the mortality of babies. If they're too heavy, they're going to die. If they're too light, they don't live long. So the intermediate, mid-weight babies survive best. This is going to be stabilizing. The extremes are selected against, meaning they don't survive. The ones that will survive are the mid-range, and they increase in number. This is stabilizing selection. And finally, you have a hawk catching these little tan mice roaming around. The gray ones blend in, causing the gray ones to increase and the tan ones not to. This is one direction because only one extreme is chosen to live, one dies. Phylogenic trees. This shows evolutionary relationships between organisms. How closely related are you, type of thing. Who's more related, a bear and a bat, or a bear and a human? Well, this is the common ancestor, that red dot, of the bat and the bear. Let's find the common ancestor for a bear and a human. Trace these lines back and they intersect right there. That is the common ancestor for a bear and a human. On the bottom, you have a timescale. Past is on the left, present is on the right. You draw a line down from the common ancestors, and you see that one common ancestor is closer and one's more distant. The bear and a human's common ancestors more recent. Therefore, a bear and a human are more related because they have a more recent common ancestor. In picture 2, what species is the common ancestor to A and C? H. Just follow the lines back to where they intersect. H did not go extinct, by the way. It just gave rise to species A and C. Speciation occurred with species H. Did not go extinct, just had a divergent evolution moment where 2 new species evolved from species H due to probably different environments, geographic and reproductive isolation. J and E, they never made it to the present day line at the top because they did not have traits to help them survive long enough to pass on their genes. In picture 3, who's more related, a cow and a sheep, or a sheep and a goat? looks like a sheep and a goat have a more recent common ancestor. Again, you find the common ancestor. You can see which one's more recent. And there's another little example. Again, you could always pause, take a look at some of these. On the bottom, letter C. Who's more closely related? A and B. Because if you look at their common ancestor, is H, that is much more closer to the present than K, which is the ancestor of A and D. To sum up major things you need in evolution, the important things you need variation. You're going to have a lot more of it in a large group. Larger populations will lead to more fighting or competition for the resources. And more variation ensures that at least one type will survive. Variation is introduced in multiple ways. 1, sexual reproduction. I always say you're 1 in 300 million, not 1 in a million. 300 million sperms swim to the egg, but only one of those sperm hit the egg. That sperm led to you. Any other sperm hit it, you would never exist. Meiosis also creates variation. It creates unique monoploid gametes, sex cells, and is done by a process called crossing over between homologous chromosomes, the shuffling or swapping of genes. You also have random mutations. This could introduce variation even in asexual organisms, and they're totally random. Gene flow is a fourth way, meaning you could have an organism from one population go into an isolated population, but it has to be the same species. So it's the flow of genes or alleles between populations of the same species, because you have to be the same species to mate. Individuals with a variation that helps survival and adaptation will allow them to live long enough to reproduce and pass on their traits and genes. Organisms that reproduce fast will have a lot more individuals, and more individuals means more variation. These organisms will evolve faster since they reproduce fast. That means there is a little bit of time, little mistake there, between generations. Evolution takes many generations, and if you reproduce fast, those generational gaps are much shorter, allowing you to evolve much quicker. The second major thing you need, a change in the environment, because you need something to choose certain organisms and let others die. The change in the environment is usually referred to as selective pressures or the selecting agent. Looking over some evidences for evolution, you have your strata here, your layers of rock. And in those sedimentary layers, you find fossil evidence. Really deep strata or layers of rock, you can have very old organisms. And they're usually very, very simple. The first organisms were bacteria. They were single-celled prokaryotes, meaning they were cells with no membrane-bound organelles. Then you had eukaryotic cells eventually evolve. That has to do with the endosymbiotic theory. And from once eukaryotic cells evolved, they came together to make multicelled organisms. And life began to get more and more complex as you went on, because you had an accumulation of adaptations. So you go from simple to complex as you go up the fossil record. The young layers being up top and the old layers being at the bottom. Comparative anatomy, you take a look at these 4 limbs. They're all made for different things: grasping, pouncing, swimming, flying, different functions. But if you look close, they have the same bones. All have a humerus, all have phalanges, ulna, carpals, radial bones. So they have very similar structures, but they make organs that are very different in what they do. So homologous structures, which these are called, they're different functions. They have different functions, but very similar structure, like bone structure. So very similar composition, different functions. This shows that they all had a common ancestor relatively recently if they have the same order of bones, the same type of bones. That's homologous structures. That shows common ancestry. These structures here all are meant for flying, different from homologous. So they all have the same structure, but wings of a bird are made of bones. Wings of a butterfly, not made of bones. So they're very similar in structure and function, but very different in how they're made. This does not show common ancestry. This shows two very different populations developing the same characteristics, probably because they were in very similar environments that selected similar traits. So two separate populations had similar variations that were selected to increase, causing the organisms to develop very similar looking organs, wings, but they were built very different. This is called convergent evolution. We have different ancestors or different populations evolve similar characteristics due to similar environments. You see this very, very well with sharks and dolphins. Dolphins are mammals, just like us. We're very similar to dolphins. We have lungs like them, bones like them. Sharks, though, very different. They look the same, but very different. Dolphins and sharks just evolved in similar environments. So certain traits are selected for, causing them to evolve similar looking structures. These things, called vestigial organs, such as wisdom teeth or your appendix or coccyx, your tailbone, and the whales, which still have a pelvis and kind of pseudo legs, they used to serve a purpose, all of these things in the past. Not anymore. And just because something that you have is not needed does not mean it will be taken out of the gene pool. Things only are removed from the gene pool if it hurts your survival. Meaning, if it causes you not to live long enough to pass on your genes, that trait will be taken out of the gene pool. Meaning, you'll die before you could pass that trait on. So these vestigial organs, like the appendix and the wisdom teeth, shows that our diet used to be much more rich in vegetation and nuts, because more flat teeth means more crushing of food. Our second to last, or third, evidence is comparative embryology. Which one of these things are human? Or fish? Which one's a cow? There's a salamander, I believe, on here. Really hard to tell the difference, because we all those organisms did share, even us and a salamander, a fish. There's actually a book called Your Inner Fish, very good book. We all came from a very distant common ancestor, but a common ancestor nonetheless. We all have very similar basic body plans. 2 eyes, a head, a end, like a head and a feet, a top part of the body and a bottom part of the body. As we move along in development, though, we start to have some differences, and you can start to see which organisms were more distantly related and which ones were more recently related. And finally, comparative biochemistry. You can compare a lot. This is the most accurate, by the way, evidence, and the most strong evidence. You compare DNA base sequences, generally using gel electrophoresis, which separates DNA based on size, or you can compare amino acid sequences or the types of proteins present to find out which species is most closely related. DNA would be the most accurate because you could have mutations or changes in DNA that do not always result in changes in the amino acid sequence, thus a change in a protein. So let me fill out this mRNA sequence here for you. Start to see some differences. And now we're going to use this amino acid chart to find the amino acids. I'll try and speed this up a bit. All right, right here, we notice there's a mutation. There's an A where there should be another letter. But CAU and CAC, they both code for the same amino acid. So this mutation, yeah, caused a change in the DNA, but not a change in the amino acid sequence. So not every mutation causes a change, like we said before, in the amino acid sequence. This is why looking at the DNA itself explicitly is very accurate. All right, filling in the rest. There are some more differences here. But this mutation, this causes a change in the amino acid sequence. Instead of THR, you have SER. And you get a couple more mutations here, causing change in amino acids. But here's a cool little thing. When you're comparing Botanicurus to X, Y, and Z, species Z has the least changes in their amino acid sequence. It's the most similar to Botanicurus because species Z has the most similar amino acid sequence. If you compare the DNA, species X, Y, and Z, they all have the same amount of DNA differences, 2 letters each. Botanicurus is most closely related to species Z because they have the most similar amino acids. Pretty cool.